Now, heading into the latest RBA meeting earlier this week, it did make sense to be short the Aussie New Zealand dollar pair, as we outlined in our video earlier at the start of the week. China's growth is slowing. The key exports of Australia, like iron ore, coal, copper, have all been tracking lower on global growth. Also, a veteran economist, Saul Eslake, saw that the RBA was perhaps underestimating the expected falls in GDP that he could see coming, and he was expecting that to miss the RBA's projections. Now, those reasons meant we had good reasons to expect the RBA to potentially take a more dovish tilt, and that could have supported further Australian dollar, New Zealand dollar downside in line with the seasonal pattern, which favoured falls. Now, however, when the RBA did meet, they did take a more optimistic view on the economic outlook. Yes, they recognised growing uncertainties, but overall, they kept a more neutral bias in the final analysis. So as a consequence, despite the Australian New Zealand dollar seasonal trend to the downside, it did make sense to close out the Aussie New Zealand dollar shorts that I'd enter in anticipation of the seasonal pattern and anticipation of the RBA perhaps turning more dovish. Now, I had two positions which I sold at 1.1181, and I took profit 50% before the meeting, and then when I woke up the following morning from the RBA meeting, the second position at break even, I closed out. So I've closed out both positions now for around a 60 pip profit for both of the positions. So there's a time when the seasonals and the fundamentals don't quite all marry, and that can be a good time just to take profit. And it's one way that you can potentially use SeasonX to enhance seasonal patterns that also fall in line with fundamental analysis. Obviously, the major trade risk here is that, well, perhaps the Aussie New Zealand dollar does keep falling despite the more neutral approach from the RBA. So sometimes the seasonal patterns can play out even when it doesn't necessarily seem advantageous or doesn't seem to marry up with the underlying fundamentals. Remember, don't just trade it, season exit.